The morning was cool and quiet when he arrived at the small airport on the outskirts of the city. The sun had barely risen, and the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. He stepped out of his car, adjusting the strap of the leather bag slung across his shoulder. Everything about him, his posture, his calm movements, the steady way he surveyed the surroundings, spoke of discipline and years of experience. He was used to situations where every detail mattered, where every action could mean the difference between safety and danger. Today, however, would not be like any other assignment he had undertaken before. He had been hired to escort her. The assignment sounded simple on paper. Accompany a prominent woman during her travels, ensure her safety, and remain professional at all times. It was not unusual work for him, but something in the way the client's representative described her piqued his curiosity. She was said to be strong-willed, intelligent, and entirely capable of taking care of herself. Yet she required protection for this particular trip, a journey through a region known for unpredictability. It was a combination of responsibility and challenge that both intrigued and reminded him of why he had chosen this line of work. As he walked into the terminal, he noticed the subtle hum of early travelers, the soft rustle of suitcases, and the distant announcements of flights. His eyes scanned the area automatically, noting exits, security personnel, and potential blind spots. He did this out of habit, though today a small part of him was distracted by anticipation. He knew the moment he would meet her. Everything about this assignment would change. And then he saw her. She was standing near the check-in counter, her posture straight but relaxed, a quiet confidence surrounding her that seemed to make the air itself shift. She was not loud, nor did she demand attention, yet somehow she drew it effortlessly. Her eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the room as if cataloging every detail, every movement. There was a calmness in her, but also a subtle intensity, a sense that she noticed more than she let on. When their eyes met for the first time, he felt a momentary pause in the rhythm of his thoughts, an almost imperceptible ripple in the usual calm he carried. She studied him for a brief second, and he could sense her curiosity. Perhaps she was trying to guess who he was, what kind of person had been assigned to accompany her. He, in turn, evaluated her, not for judgment, not for criticism, but for understanding. In his line of work, understanding people quickly was essential, but this was different. He sensed layers in her, strength, vulnerability, intelligence, and a hint of guardedness that made him want to know more. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady, professional but not cold. She nodded politely, her lips forming a faint smile. "Good morning," she replied, her voice calm, measured, and with just a trace of warmth. The introduction was brief, formal, and polite, just as expected. They exchanged names, and he confirmed the itinerary for the day. She listened carefully, asking questions only when necessary, her tone never impatient or demanding. There was a clarity to her mind, a precision in the way she spoke, that immediately set her apart from most people he encountered. He noted it silently, impressed by her composure and her ability to remain thoughtful even in the small chaos of a busy airport. As they moved toward the car waiting outside, he walked slightly behind her, his instincts tuned to the surroundings. He noticed the way she moved, deliberate, confident, unhurried. It was the kind of presence that naturally commanded respect. People seemed to instinctively give her space, not out of fear, but out of acknowledgement of her quiet authority. He admired it. The drive to the hotel was mostly quiet. The city was waking up, the streets filling with early commuters, the aroma of freshly baked bread drifting from a nearby bakery, and the sound of birds creating a soft soundtrack to the morning. He occasionally glanced at her, noticing small details, the way her fingers lightly tapped on the armrest, the way her eyes followed the passing scenery, the occasional smile that appeared as she observed something amusing or interesting. "Do you travel often for work?" he asked after a while, breaking the silence carefully, not wanting to intrude. "Yes, quite a bit," she replied, her tone casual, almost conversational. "But this trip, it feels different. Maybe because I'm going somewhere unfamiliar." She paused, as if considering how much to reveal. "I usually like to be independent, but sometimes circumstances require someone to watch my back." He nodded, understanding her completely. Independence was admirable, but no one was invincible, no matter how capable they seemed. "I'm here to make sure nothing interrupts your plans," he said. "You focus on your work, your schedule, and I'll handle the rest." His voice was calm, reassuring, not overbearing. There was a silence that followed, but it was comfortable, not awkward. He respected that she was processing, absorbing, and perhaps evaluating him the same way he was observing her. In his experience, first impressions were only part of the story. True understanding took time, and today he was prepared to give it. When they reached the hotel, the lobby was bustling with the morning rush of check-ins and early travelers. He led her efficiently through the process, ensuring everything went smoothly, handling any minor issues without drawing attention. She moved gracefully beside him, trusting him without needing to overtly acknowledge it. Once they were in the elevator heading to her room, she finally spoke in a slightly softer tone, one that hinted at curiosity rather than formality. "Do you always observe everything so carefully?" she asked, glancing at him briefly. He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It's part of the job," he replied honestly. "But sometimes, it's just a habit. I notice things even when I'm not working." Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, there was an unspoken connection, a subtle understanding that went beyond words. She nodded, accepting his explanation, and the elevator doors opened on her floor. As they entered her room, he placed her bags carefully, arranging them without asking, sensing what needed attention without being instructed. She watched silently, impressed by his efficiency, but more by the quiet respect he showed. He didn't treat her like someone who needed protection out of weakness. He treated her like someone whose strength he admired and wanted to honor. She thanked him with a small smile, and he nodded in acknowledgement. "I'll be outside if you need anything," he said, his voice professional, but there was a subtle warmth that hadn't been there at the airport. She appreciated it but didn't comment, simply noting it in the back of her mind. As he left the room, he felt a faint shift in his own emotions. He wasn't usually affected by the people he escorted. He was trained to remain detached, to focus on duty rather than personal attachment. But there was something different about her, something in the way she carried herself, in the quiet strength behind her eyes that made him pay attention, not just as her escort, but as someone genuinely interested in understanding who she was. He stepped back into the corridor and paused for a moment, looking back at her room door, his mind slightly unsettled by the thought he barely allowed himself to consider. This assignment was supposed to be routine, professional, and predictable. Yet from the very first meeting, there was a subtle pull he couldn't ignore. He reminded himself silently to stay focused, to keep his emotions in check, to do what he was hired to do. But deep down, he knew that today's quiet morning had already set something in motion, something beyond duty, something that neither of them could predict. The next morning began with a soft drizzle, the sky painted in gentle shades of gray. The city streets shimmered with wet reflections of neon signs and early commuters rushing with umbrellas. He arrived at her hotel promptly, as he always did, ready to accompany her on the day's journey. Despite the rain, she was already waiting in the lobby, her posture relaxed yet alert. She greeted him with a small nod, her eyes scanning the entrance as if she were assessing the day ahead. "Morning," he said, his voice steady. He had gotten used to starting the day quietly with minimal conversation until the rhythm of travel had taken hold. "Morning," she replied, slipping her coat around her shoulders. There was a softness in her tone today, almost like the rain had settled her thoughts, giving her a calm focus. They moved toward the waiting car in silence, a companionable quiet that was far from uncomfortable. He noticed the faint smile that curved her lips as she watched raindrops slide down the glass, the way her fingers lightly brushed the strap of her bag as if finding comfort in its familiar weight. The little details of her movements were becoming clearer to him, and he realized he was paying attention not just as a professional, but as someone quietly admiring her presence. The drive was longer than expected because of the rain-soaked streets, but he navigated it smoothly, keeping them both safe and calm. Occasionally, she would glance out the window, her expression thoughtful, her mind clearly processing things beyond what she spoke. He admired that about her, the way she could be present in the moment while still keeping an awareness of the world around her. It was a balance he found rare in people. After some time, he broke the silence gently. "Do you often come to this city?" he asked, careful not to sound intrusive. "Not really," she said, her voice almost a whisper, like she was sharing something private despite the mundane nature of the question. "Most of my work keeps me moving, but I try to learn a little about each place I visit. Even small things like a quiet cafe or a park can tell you a lot about a city." He nodded, impressed by her thoughtfulness. "It's good to notice the small things," he replied. "They often matter more than we realize." For a while, they drove in companionable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Yet in that silence, something shifted subtly. He noticed the way she occasionally glanced at him, not out of suspicion or curiosity about his work, but with a quiet acknowledgement, as if she were trying to understand who he was beyond the role of an escort. He, in turn, found himself studying her, not just for her safety or habits, but for the person she was beneath the carefully measured exterior. Their first stop was a small local cafe tucked away on a quiet street. The kind of place travelers often missed, but she had requested it specifically, a subtle hint that she appreciated simplicity and authenticity. He opened the door for her, and she stepped inside gracefully, giving him a brief, polite smile. The warmth of the cafe was a contrast to the rain outside, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft murmur of other early customers. They found a quiet corner, away from the busier tables. She placed her bag carefully beside her chair and sat down, her gaze resting on the window as she watched the rain fall steadily. He pulled out a chair across from her, careful to maintain respectful distance while still being present. "What brings you here?" he asked, nodding toward the menu. "Sometimes," she began, "it's not about what the place is, but about the pause it gives you. A cup of coffee, a quiet corner. It's a moment to think, to breathe, to feel like you're not always moving." Her words were simple, yet there was a depth to them, a hint of vulnerability he hadn't expected. He studied her for a moment, sensing her honesty. "It's rare to find moments like that," he said. "Even when you're constantly on the move, taking a breath like that matters." She nodded, as if relieved that someone understood. "Exactly," she said softly. "Most people are too busy rushing, looking at what's next. They miss the simple things that matter the most." He offered her a polite smile, feeling a warmth he hadn't anticipated. He was trained to maintain emotional distance, but her words, her presence, subtly drew him in. He realized that this journey was beginning to be about more than just his professional responsibility. It was about connection, about understanding someone who was quietly remarkable. After a while, they left the cafe, stepping back into the rain. He held an umbrella for her, a gesture so natural it surprised even him. She accepted it without a word, letting him guide them through the wet streets. The rain was no longer an inconvenience, but a gentle backdrop to their shared moment, a quiet intimacy forming in the simplest actions. Throughout the day, they visited several locations, business meetings for her, brief errands, and a few scenic spots she had wanted to see. At each place, he remained attentive, his presence steady but unobtrusive, yet in quiet moments they found themselves exchanging more than just practical conversation. He learned about her passions, her quiet love for literature, her curiosity about people and places, and the moments that made her feel alive. She, in turn, noticed the subtle attentiveness he showed, the way he observed without judgment, how he anticipated challenges without being intrusive. There was a steadiness about him, a quiet reliability that felt comforting. She began to realize that she could trust him, not just with her safety, but with the small vulnerabilities she had never shared with anyone traveling alone. At one point, while waiting for a taxi in a narrow side street, she spoke softly, almost as if testing the waters. "Do you ever get tired of always being alert?" she asked. He considered the question carefully. "Yes, sometimes," he admitted. "But it's not just about alertness. It's about responsibility. When you care about what happens to someone, it never really feels like a burden. It becomes part of who you are." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time he felt a flicker of something unspoken between them. Respect? Admiration? Something more subtle and complex? He couldn't name it, and neither could she, but it was there, an invisible thread connecting them. As the day wore on, they returned to the hotel. She was slightly tired from the long hours, the constant movement, yet there was a contentment in her expression that caught him off guard. It was as if the day, though filled with routine and obligations, had offered her a quiet joy she hadn't expected. He, too, felt an unfamiliar lightness, as though simply being near her had shifted the weight he often carried in his work. Later, when she retired to her room to prepare for the evening's engagements, he lingered just outside, waiting until she was settled. He reflected on the day, aware that something about this assignment was changing him. He was accustomed to professional detachment, to seeing people as tasks to be managed, not as individuals with layers to uncover. Yet with her, it was different. He found himself thinking about her in moments of quiet reflection, wondering about her thoughts, her moods, and the subtle ways she moved through the world. He reminded himself that he had a job to do, a responsibility that could not be compromised. But deep down, he realized that the boundaries he relied upon were beginning to blur. He wasn't just escorting her anymore. He was following her presence, drawn to the quiet strength and warmth she carried effortlessly. That night, as he made his rounds outside her room, he heard the soft sound of rain against the window, the distant hum of the city, and he allowed himself a moment to think about how extraordinary she was. The professional distance he had planned to maintain was becoming harder to hold, and yet he knew he must continue to balance his feelings with duty, awareness with discretion. He took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and caution. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new interactions, and new opportunities to learn about her. And even though he couldn't yet admit it fully, he sensed that their journey together was no longer just about her safety. It was becoming about something more, a quiet connection, an unspoken understanding, and the slow, careful unfolding of a bond he hadn't anticipated but could not ignore. As he finally stepped away from the corridor, leaving her to her rest, he felt a small, almost imperceptible shift in his own heart. This assignment, which began as routine, had quietly transformed into something more profound. And neither of them could have predicted that over the coming days, what started as a professional responsibility would evolve into a journey of trust, understanding, and an emotional connection that neither could escape. The following day began with an unusual tension in the air. The sky was clear, the sun bright, but there was a sense of anticipation, as if the day itself was aware of the moments yet to unfold. He arrived at the hotel early, as always, to ensure everything was prepared. Her schedule was demanding, with meetings, briefings, and a series of public appearances. He had handled countless itineraries before, but something about this one felt different. When she appeared in the lobby, she seemed more relaxed than the day before, yet there was a quiet intensity in her eyes. She acknowledged him with a small smile, and he returned it, noticing a faint warmth that had been growing between them since the first morning. He had been careful to remain professional, but each day it became more challenging to suppress the sense of connection he felt toward her. They began their journey with the usual routine, a careful navigation through crowded streets, quick stops for essentials, and quiet observation of the surroundings. But today, a subtle change in the environment tested their ability to remain composed. Traffic was heavier than expected, and the streets were unusually chaotic. Vendors called out from the sidewalks, and a minor accident nearby caused a temporary blockage. He remained vigilant, scanning for potential risks, his senses sharpened by experience. She noticed, and there was a flicker of acknowledgement in her eyes, a silent recognition of his skill and attentiveness. During the drive, she spoke more freely than before. "I didn't expect travel to be so revealing," she said softly. "It shows you not just the city, but the people, the patterns, the little things you might miss if you're always rushing." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's why it's important to notice, to stay aware. But it's also why we protect what's important, so people can notice without fear." His words were measured, calm, but there was a quiet sincerity that seemed to reach her in a way he hadn't anticipated. As the day progressed, they visited several official venues, each requiring precise coordination. He moved beside her like a shadow, alert to every movement, every possibility, ensuring her safety without drawing attention to himself. Yet, between the formalities, they found moments of quiet connection. During a brief walk between locations, she pointed out a small street mural hidden in an alley, its colors vivid against the worn walls. "Look at this," she said, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Most people would walk past without noticing." He followed her gaze, appreciating the artistry. "It is," he said, "and you noticed it because you look beyond the obvious. That's a rare quality." She smiled, a mixture of surprise and pleasure at his observation. "Thank you," she said. "Most people don't see the small things. It's almost like they're too busy focusing on themselves." He stayed silent for a moment, reflecting on her words. He had spent his life observing people, but rarely had he encountered someone whose perception was both sharp and gentle. It was a quality that drew him in, even as he reminded himself to maintain professional distance. Later, during a scheduled break in a quiet hotel lounge, the atmosphere shifted. They sat across from each other, cups of tea between them, the soft hum of conversation around them fading into the background. For the first time, there was no pressing schedule, no immediate threat, just a shared moment of calm. "You make this seem easier than it is," she said quietly. "Traveling alone in unfamiliar places can be exhausting, but you make it manageable. I didn't expect that." He looked at her, sensing the genuine gratitude in her tone. "It's my job," he replied, but his voice carried a softness he could not hide. "But it's easier when you trust the person doing it. You make it easier too, by being careful, aware, and mindful of what matters." She studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. I think I'm starting to realize that I don't always have to carry everything alone. Maybe I don't have to pretend to be invincible all the time." His heart stirred at her words. She wasn't speaking just to him. She was speaking to herself, revealing a layer of vulnerability few ever saw. And yet, he felt honored to witness it, to be someone she could quietly confide in, even in such small ways. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside. A small crowd had gathered near the hotel entrance. He immediately stood, scanning the scene with trained precision. A minor accident had occurred nearby, and people were curious, stepping dangerously close to the road. Without a word, he positioned himself near her, subtly guiding her to the safest spot, his body angled to shield her without making her feel confined. She noticed the care he took, the quiet professionalism that never overstepped boundaries. Yet, in the midst of the minor chaos, something shifted. She realized how much she relied on him, not just for protection, but for the calm assurance he brought. And he, standing there, aware of her presence, felt a protective impulse stronger than ever before. It was no longer just duty, it was personal. Once the situation cleared, they continued their day, but the air between them had subtly changed. Words were exchanged less frequently, but glances lingered longer, gestures carried more weight. There was a mutual awareness of the unspoken connection growing between them, even as neither dared to name it aloud. As evening approached, they returned to her hotel. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of gold and rose, and the city streets were bathed in a warm, fading light. He walked beside her, noticing the gentle sway of her movements, the way she occasionally adjusted her bag or coat with care. Every small detail seemed significant now, every gesture a glimpse into who she truly was. In the hotel corridor, she paused to adjust her coat. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, almost hesitantly, "what it would be like if we didn't have to be careful all the time? If we could just be ourselves?" He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but responsibility often comes first. Still, moments like this, they remind us that we are more than what we do. They remind us to feel, to connect, to notice the world beyond our duties." She smiled, a faint, almost wistful smile, and he realized that she understood him more than she probably knew. There was a recognition in her eyes, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond forming between them, even as they both remained cautious. Later that evening, after she had prepared for the next day's engagements, he lingered just outside her room, reflecting on the day. He had spent countless days protecting people, observing their routines and maintaining distance. Yet today had been different. Today he had felt the subtle pull of something beyond professional duty. He was drawn not just to her presence, but to her mind, her thoughts, her quiet strength. He reminded himself of the rules he lived by: professionalism first, emotions secondary. But the truth was undeniable. Something had shifted between them, a delicate connection that neither could ignore. It was in the way she looked at him, the small gestures of trust she allowed, the moments of shared reflection that went beyond necessity. And yet, he knew the day was far from over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new encounters, and new opportunities to navigate both duty and the growing emotional tension. He could not predict what would happen, nor could he control the way his heart responded. All he could do was remain vigilant, remain attentive, and hope that the careful balance between responsibility and emotion would hold. As he finally walked away from her room, the quiet hum of the hotel settling around him, he allowed himself a moment to feel the strange mix of anticipation and caution. This assignment, which had begun as a straightforward task, was evolving into something far more complex. The connection he felt toward her was growing, and he knew, deep down, that the days ahead would challenge not just his skills as a protector, but his ability to manage feelings, he had long considered irrelevant to his work. And somewhere, he sensed that she, too, was beginning to feel the weight of this unspoken bond. The way she moved through the day, the subtle glances, the moments of quiet acknowledgement, they were small, but they carried meaning. Meaning that neither of them could yet fully understand, but meaning that would shape every moment of the journey yet to come. By the time he finally returned to his own quarters that night, he was aware of a restless energy within him. Sleep would not come easily, for his mind replayed the day, noting every detail, every expression, every fleeting moment of connection. He knew the following day would bring new challenges, but he also knew something else. The professional distance he had relied upon for so long was quietly eroding, replaced by something far more complex and powerful. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to acknowledge a possibility that had previously seemed improbable. Perhaps this assignment, this journey, would not end with a simple farewell. Perhaps it would evolve into something neither of them could ignore. A connection born of trust, shared experience, and a slow, careful understanding of hearts that had remained guarded for too long. The next morning felt heavy, as if the air itself carried a weight of anticipation. He arrived at her hotel on time, as always, his presence calm, disciplined, and focused. Yet, inside, there was an undercurrent of unease he could not fully explain. The previous days had shifted something between them, an unspoken tension, a subtle connection that neither had yet named. It was not inappropriate, nor had boundaries been crossed, but it was real, undeniable, and quietly pressing against the edges of professionalism. When she appeared in the lobby, she looked more serious than usual. Her smile was polite, but her eyes carried a trace of fatigue, as if the days of travel, engagements, and constant attention had begun to weigh on her. She greeted him briefly, her voice soft but reserved. "Good morning," she said, her tone measured. "Good morning," he replied, noting the slight change in her demeanor. He studied her carefully, not intrusively, but with the instinctive awareness of someone whose job required vigilance. He sensed that something was on her mind, though she had not yet spoken of it. Their day began with a series of visits, meetings, site inspections, and a few brief public appearances. Throughout it all, he remained close, ever watchful, ensuring her safety while observing her subtle reactions. Yet, there were moments when her composure faltered, small cracks in the carefully constructed armor she carried. He noticed them immediately, the brief sigh when a meeting ran too long, the quick glance out the window during a dull speech, the way her hands fidgeted ever so slightly with a pen or her bag strap. During a break between events, they found themselves alone in a small hallway outside a conference room. She leaned against the wall, her expression thoughtful, and he stood nearby, respecting the space between them while remaining attentive. "I'm not sure how to handle all of this," she admitted quietly, almost to herself. "I try to manage everything, but sometimes it's overwhelming, and I feel guilty for needing someone to help me." He looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her words. She rarely allowed anyone to see this side of her, a side of doubt, fatigue, and vulnerability. "You're not alone in feeling that way," he said gently. "It's natural to rely on others when circumstances demand it. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." She met his gaze, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something more than gratitude, something tentative, hesitant, and vulnerable. "I suppose I've always been expected to manage on my own," she said. "Asking for help feels strange, even when it's necessary." He nodded, understanding more than she realized. Sometimes the hardest part is accepting that support doesn't diminish who you are. It strengthens you. It's okay to let someone share the burden. She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and acknowledgement. And in that brief moment, the invisible bond between them deepened, a quiet, unspoken understanding that went beyond words, beyond duty. Yet, as much as the day offered moments of connection, it also brought tension. During a public event in the late afternoon, a minor miscommunication threatened to disrupt the schedule. She handled it with her usual grace, but he sensed her frustration beneath the surface. He approached cautiously after the event, standing just a few steps away, ready to assist if needed but not intrude. "You handled that remarkably well," he said quietly. "Most people would have struggled more." She sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't struggle," she replied, though her voice betrayed the exhaustion she felt. I just hate feeling like I need help, even when I know it's necessary." He stepped closer, careful to maintain the professional boundary, yet his tone was gentle, empathetic. "Needing help doesn't make you weak," he said. "It makes you human. And anyone who can handle what you do while staying composed, that's strength, not weakness." Her eyes softened, a subtle warmth returning, and she gave him a quiet nod. The brief connection lingered, unspoken, but charged with a weight that neither of them could ignore. As the day continued, the tension between them grew, not from conflict, but from the challenge of navigating emotions that neither had expected. She began to notice how much she relied on his presence, not just for safety, but for a quiet sense of reassurance. She appreciated his attentiveness, his ability to anticipate problems, and the calm steadiness he brought to moments of uncertainty. And he, in turn, found himself more aware of her moods, her gestures, and the subtle changes in her expression. He realized he was no longer observing her only as a client, but as a person he genuinely cared about. By late afternoon, they found themselves walking along a quiet street after finishing the day's engagements. The city had settled into the evening, and the air carried the gentle hum of nightlife mixed with distant traffic. She glanced at him, her expression contemplative. "Do you ever feel like you're caught between duty and everything else?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. He considered her words carefully. "Yes," he admitted. "There are times when duty requires restraint, but life has a way of reminding us that there's more to consider. Moments, connections, feelings, they don't always fit neatly into rules or expectations." She nodded, a faint smile curving her lips. "I suppose I've been so focused on being careful, on being in control, that I forgot there's more to life than schedules and safety." He looked at her, sensing the honesty and vulnerability in her words. "And realizing that doesn't make you careless," he said. "It makes you aware. It makes you human." For a moment they walked in silence, the unspoken understanding between them deepening. Neither had crossed boundaries, yet both were aware of the subtle emotional tension building. Each glance, each small gesture, carried meaning, and both felt the pull of something neither could fully name. Later at the hotel, she retired to her room earlier than usual. He lingered outside, listening to the quiet hum of activity in the hallway, reflecting on the day. The professional distance he had maintained for so long was beginning to feel impossible. His thoughts continually returned to her. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the subtle strength and vulnerability she carried effortlessly. He reminded himself that he had a job to do, that boundaries were necessary, and that emotions could not interfere with responsibility. Yet deep down, he knew that something had changed. The careful balance between duty and feeling was slipping, and he could not ignore the growing connection between them. As he made his rounds outside her room, he thought about the complexity of the situation. She was strong, independent, and entirely capable, yet she allowed herself small moments of trust with him, and he, trained to remain detached, found himself responding not just with professionalism, but with genuine care. It was a delicate, unspoken dance, one that neither could control, yet both felt with increasing clarity. That night, he reflected on the day's events, the tension, the subtle conflicts, and the moments of connection. He realized that tomorrow would likely bring new challenges, not just in terms of logistics and safety, but in navigating the emotions that were steadily intertwining with duty. He could not predict how she felt, nor could he name the feelings that were growing within him, but he understood one truth. The professional boundaries he had relied on were no longer sufficient to contain what was happening. And somewhere, he sensed that she, too, was feeling it. The cautious glances, the small smiles, the moments of shared understanding, they were all signs of a bond growing stronger, even as both struggled to reconcile it with their own expectations and responsibilities. As he finally retired for the night, he allowed himself a quiet acknowledgement of the truth he had been avoiding. This assignment was no longer just about protection or professionalism. It had become something far more complex, a delicate balance of trust, emotion, and unspoken connection. And neither of them could ignore it, even if they tried. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new interactions, and new opportunities to test the boundaries between duty and feeling. And he knew, deep down, that both he and she were on the verge of realizing something neither could deny. The connection forming between them was real, and it was growing stronger with every passing day. The final morning of their journey arrived with a gentle calmness that contrasted sharply with the tension of the previous days. The sky was clear, painted in soft shades of gold and blue, and the air carried a freshness that hinted at possibility. He arrived at her hotel, as punctual as always, carrying the same calm professionalism he had displayed since the beginning. Yet, beneath the surface, a quiet anticipation stirred within him. Today would be different. He could feel it, though he could not yet name why. She appeared in the lobby shortly after, carrying herself with her usual grace. Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was a glimmer of something unspoken, a recognition of the bond that had grown over the past days. There was no need for words. The silence itself carried meaning. She smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and vulnerability, and he felt a stirring in his chest that was both thrilling and disorienting. They began their final journey together, moving through the city streets that had become familiar, yet still full of discovery. Today, there was a lighter rhythm to their movements, a sense that both were aware of the significance of this day. Small gestures, the way she adjusted her coat, the way he subtly guided them through crowded areas, carried an intimacy that neither had yet allowed themselves to acknowledge fully. As they traveled, she spoke more openly than she had before. "I've been thinking," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "about how much this journey has changed my perspective. Not just on travel or work, but on people, on connections, on trust." He glanced at her, catching the vulnerability in her eyes. "It has changed me too," he admitted quietly. "I've spent my life observing and protecting, but rarely allowing myself to feel beyond duty. You've shown me something different." Her eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by his honesty. "I wasn't expecting that," she said, her voice gentle. "I thought you'd always remain distant, professional. I didn't think you'd let yourself care." He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I tried," he said, "but you made it impossible not to. You've shown me that it's okay to notice, to feel, to connect. And that's not a weakness. It's something rare and valuable." There was a pause as they both absorbed the weight of those words. The unspoken emotions that had been building over days of shared experiences were now surfacing, gently, but undeniably. For the first time, the professional barrier between them felt less like a wall and more like a thin veil. Fragile, but not fragile enough to hide what had grown in the silence of routine, shared responsibility, and quiet moments of understanding. Their first stop was a scenic overlook she had requested to see before leaving the city. The sun was higher now, casting a warm glow across the streets below. She stood at the railing, looking out over the city with a contemplative expression. He joined her, standing a respectful distance behind, but the space between them felt charged, alive with the emotions neither had yet spoken. "You've been more than just my escort," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I didn't expect that either. I thought this would be about safety, logistics, professionalism. But it's been more." He turned to look at her, seeing the honesty and vulnerability in her eyes. "It has," he agreed. "I can't explain it entirely, but these days, they've changed something for me. Being near you, seeing how you move through the world, it's made me feel more alive than I have in years." Her breath caught slightly, and she looked down, as if gathering courage. I feel the same way," she admitted. "I wasn't expecting it, and I don't know what this means exactly, but I know I can't ignore it." The moment lingered between them, heavy with possibility and unspoken desire. For days they had danced around these feelings, maintaining the careful balance of duty and distance. But now, faced with the quiet clarity of the morning and the honesty they could no longer deny, the weight of their emotions could no longer be contained. He took a careful step closer, respecting her space, yet bridging the invisible gap that had separated them. "We don't have to define it immediately," he said gently. "But we can acknowledge it. We can be honest about what we feel, even if it's complicated." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with emotion, and nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "I want that. I want honesty. And maybe something more, if we're careful." He reached out, his hand hovering briefly before resting lightly on hers. The touch was tentative, respectful, but electric. It was a small gesture, yet it carried the weight of days of shared experiences, trust, and unspoken connection. She responded instinctively, not pulling away, allowing the contact, allowing the acknowledgement of something they had both felt but never named. For the rest of the morning, they moved together with a new awareness, small touches and glances carrying meaning, moments of shared laughter and quiet smiles marking a shift in their relationship. Every word, every gesture felt layered with significance. The professional distance remained, but it was softened by the connection they now acknowledged, a bond built over days of travel, trust, and subtle understanding. During their final stop, a small cafe she had mentioned earlier in the week, they sat together, sharing a simple meal. Conversation flowed easily, more openly than ever before. They spoke of hopes, of dreams, of moments from their past that shaped who they were. The laughter they shared was unguarded, and the silences between words were comfortable, filled with mutual recognition and respect. "I never expected to meet someone like you on a work assignment," she said, her eyes meeting his with a mix of sincerity and admiration. "I thought this would be routine, but you've changed my perspective. Not just on travel or trust, but on connection, on allowing someone in." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers gently. "And you've changed mine," he said. "I've spent years keeping distance, keeping control, keeping emotions in check. But you've shown me that it's possible to care, to feel, without losing strength. You've shown me how to trust in connection." A quiet warmth spread between them, and for the first time, they both allowed themselves to fully embrace the emotions that had been quietly growing. The professional roles remained, but they were now intertwined with something deeper, something undeniable. When the time came to leave, he escorted her back to her hotel. Neither spoke much, the weight of the morning's honesty hanging in the air. She paused at the entrance, turning to face him. Her eyes searched his, looking for reassurance, for confirmation of what they both felt. "I don't want this to end," she said softly. "Not the connection, not us." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "It doesn't have to," he replied. "We've found something rare in a short time, something worth honoring. It won't be easy, but it's worth it. And I want to explore it with you." A faint smile curved her lips, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Then, she whispered. "Let's see where this goes." Together. For the first time since the assignment began, he allowed himself to feel fully the bond, the emotions, the possibilities. It was no longer just duty or professionalism. It was trust. It was admiration. It was connection. And it was love. They stood together for a moment, simply allowing the silence to speak. The city bustled around them, unaware of the quiet transformation that had taken place between two people who had come together under professional circumstances, only to discover something far more profound. Finally, he extended his hand gently, and she took it, their fingers intertwining naturally. The touch was symbolic of everything that had grown between them: respect, trust, understanding, and a slowly blossoming love. Neither knew exactly what the future held, but for the first time, neither felt afraid to face it together. As they walked back into the hotel, side by side, they carried with them the understanding that what had begun as an assignment had become a journey of the heart. A journey that neither could have predicted, yet one that both would embrace fully, carefully, and courageously. By the end of the day, the professional barriers had softened, the tension had eased, and the connection between them was clear and undeniable. They had discovered a rare and precious truth: that love, trust, and connection could grow even in the most unexpected circumstances. And in acknowledging it, they both knew they had found something worth protecting, nurturing, and cherishing for the days to come. The journey that began with duty had transformed into something far greater. It was no longer just about protection or obligation. It was about hearts meeting, trust forming, and love quietly unfolding. And as they stood together, looking out over the city one last time before her next journey, both understood a simple, profound truth. They had found each other, and they could no longer imagine life without that bond.